$400,000. That's the gap. Two friends, same college, same starting salary, down to the dollar, same city, same age. 15 years later, one of them has a net worth north of $450,000. The other one has less than $50,000 saved, and he's the one who got promoted faster. Read that again if you need to, because it doesn't make sense on the surface. The person who climbed the career ladder quicker, who earned more raises, who by every visible metric was winning, ended up nearly $400,000 behind. If that sentence just made your stomach drop a little, good, because one of these two people is you. And by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly which one, and more importantly, exactly why. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time pulling apart stories like this one, because the math behind it is more disturbing than any of the individual facts. Two people can start in the exact same financial position, make the exact same income for over a decade, and end up separated by nearly $500,000. And it usually isn't because one of them got a lucky break or a secret inheritance. It's because of one decision made early that neither of them thought was a big deal at the time. Stick around, because I'm going to walk you through exactly what that decision was, when it happened, and how you find out which friend you've actually been, using real numbers the entire way through, not vague encouragement. Before I name names, let me ask you something. If I told you two people had identical salaries for 15 straight years, what would you guess the gap between their net worths would be? Most people's gut instinct is somewhere between $0 and maybe $20,000. Some rounding error caused by one person having slightly higher rent or a nicer car. Nobody's first guess is $400,000. That number sounds like it requires a different job, a different tax bracket, a different life entirely. It doesn't. It requires one specific choice made in year one that compounds silently for a decade and a half, while both people go on thinking they're living roughly parallel lives. Let's meet them. We'll call them Jordan and Alex, both 24 years old, both hired the exact same month at the exact same company in the exact same entry-level role at an identical starting salary of $58,000. They met in college. They're genuinely close friends, and for the first several years of their careers, their lives look almost indistinguishable from the outside. Same apartment complex, same happy hours, same complaints about their manager. If you'd asked either of their coworkers to guess which one of them would end up wealthier, nobody could have told you, because there was nothing visibly different between them. That's the detail worth sitting with for a second, because it means this story isn't about spotting some hidden red flag early on. There wasn't one. Both of them looked, sounded, and lived like people on identical trajectories. And in every way that showed up in conversation, they were. Here's the myth this video is going to dismantle. Most people believe that wealth gaps this large require a wealth gap in income. Bigger salary, better job, luckier break, richer parents. And sometimes that's true. But Jordan and Alex's salaries tracked almost identically for the entire 15 years. Both got promoted twice. Both ended up earning close to $95,000 by year 15. Same raises, roughly the same timing, roughly the same percentage increases. If income explained wealth, these two should have nearly identical net worths today. They don't. And the reason isn't a mystery once you see where the paths actually split. Here's an analogy that makes this click immediately. Picture two snowballs sitting at the top of the exact same hill. Identical size, identical starting point. One person gives their snowball a single push in month 3. The other person doesn't push theirs until year 8. Both snowballs are rolling down the same hill, in the same conditions, gathering the same snow, at the same rate once they're moving. But the snowball that started rolling in month 3 has had years of extra momentum by the time the second one even gets going. And by the bottom of the hill, they're not even remotely the same size anymore, even though nothing about the hill or the snow was ever different. That 5-year head start is the entire story of Jordan and Alex, and it's the entire story behind most enormous wealth gaps between people with identical incomes. Let's go back to year 1 and find the actual divergence point. Because it's smaller and more boring than you'd expect. In month 4 of their first job, Alex opened a retirement account and set up an automatic contribution of 10% of his paycheck, roughly $483 a month at his starting salary, into a low-cost index fund. It took him about 20 minutes on a Saturday afternoon, and then he genuinely forgot about it. Jordan meant to do the same thing. He even opened the account, but he told himself he'd start contributing once he paid off his last bit of credit card debt from college, once he built up a comfortable cash cushion, once things felt a little more settled. That once things settled down moment, the same trap that shows up in almost every story like this one, never actually arrived, the way it never does. Jordan didn't start contributing anything meaningful to his retirement account until year 6. Let's run the numbers on what those 5 years actually cost, because this is where the gap stops being abstract. From year 1 to year 6, Alex contributed roughly $483 a month, growing slightly with each raise, into his investment account. At a conservative 7% average annual return, by the end of year 6, Alex's account was sitting at approximately $38,000. Jordan's account, over that same period, was sitting at close to zero because he genuinely hadn't started yet. Now, here's the part most people get wrong when they imagine catching up. Jordan finally does start contributing in year 6, and here's the thing. He actually contributes more aggressively than Alex from that point forward, because by then he's earning more and feels motivated to make up for lost time. He puts in $650 a month starting in year 6, noticeably more than Alex's contribution at that point. You'd think that extra effort would close the gap over time. It doesn't, not even close. And understanding why is the single most important financial lesson in this entire video. By year 15, Alex, who never increased his contribution percentage beyond that original 10% and simply let it ride, has an account worth approximately $215,000. Jordan, who started 5 years later but contributed more aggressively once he began, has an account worth approximately $95,000. Jordan put in more money per month for 9 straight years. He still ended up with less than half of what Alex has, purely because of those first 5 years Alex spent quietly compounding, while Jordan was waiting to feel ready. Let's stress test this, because I don't want you thinking this only works under one specific set of assumptions. What if the market had performed worse than 7% average annual return? Even at a more conservative 5%, Alex's 5-year head start still produces a final balance roughly double Jordan's, because the mechanism driving the gap isn't really about the return rate at all. It's about how many years each dollar has to compound before it's needed. What if Jordan had been even more aggressive, contributing $800 a month instead of $650 starting in year 6? He'd close some of the gap, ending up closer to $115,000 by year 15 instead of $95,000, but he'd still be nowhere near Alex's $115,000 because no amount of additional monthly contribution fully substitutes for years that have already passed. This is the part that trips people up most consistently. We intuitively think of money and time as interchangeable, that enough extra money can always buy back lost time. With compounding specifically, that's only partially true, and the older the missed years,
that's the retirement account gap alone, and it's already over $120,000. But it's not the full $400,000. And this is where the story gets more interesting, because the second gap comes from something almost nobody thinks about as a wealth-building decision at all: housing. In year 3, Alex bought a modest condo using savings he'd built up separately from his retirement contributions, plus a standard mortgage. It wasn't a dream home. It was a reasonable, slightly boring 2-bedroom condo in a decent but unglamorous part of town, purchased specifically because the monthly payment was comparable to what he'd been paying in rent. Jordan, meanwhile, kept renting, telling himself, reasonably at the time, that buying felt like a huge commitment, and he wanted more flexibility while he figured out his career. Here's what happened to that condo over the next 12 years. Alex's mortgage payment barely changed the entire time, while rents in the same area rose steadily, the way they generally do. By year 15, Alex was paying roughly the same amount on his mortgage as he had been in year 4, while Jordan's rent on a comparable unit had increased by nearly 70% over that same period. More importantly, every mortgage payment Alex made was slowly converting into equity, ownership, something with a growing dollar value attached to it. Every rent payment Jordan made converted into exactly $0 of ownership, the same as it had on day 1. By year 15, after appreciation and mortgage paydown, Alex's condo, which he'd bought for roughly $220,000, was worth approximately $340,000, and he'd paid down a meaningful chunk of the loan on top of that, giving him equity of somewhere around $180,000. Jordan, over that same 15 years, had paid an enormous amount of money in cumulative rent, money that built zero equity, zero ownership, zero asset of any kind. Add the retirement account gap of roughly $120,000 to the housing equity gap of roughly $180,000, and you're already at $300,000, purely from 2 decisions, both made in the first 3 years, both of which felt completely reasonable and non-urgent at the time they were being avoided. The remaining piece of the $400,000 comes from something smaller, but worth naming: the compounding effect of Alex's slightly lower monthly housing cost over time, which freed up extra cash that he, again, mostly automated into additional investing, adding another meaningful chunk to the total gap by year 15.
It's worth pausing on the housing piece specifically, because it's the part of this story people push back on the most, usually with some version of, but what if the market had gone down instead? That's a fair question, and the honest answer is that real estate markets do fluctuate, sometimes significantly, and Alex could have bought at a worse moment and seen less appreciation or even a temporary decline. But even in a flat or mildly declining housing market, Alex would still have been building equity through mortgage paydown alone, converting a portion of every monthly payment into ownership, while Jordan's rent payments would have converted into zero ownership, regardless of what the housing market did. The appreciation made Alex's outcome better than the baseline case. But even the baseline case, flat prices, ordinary mortgage paydown, still produces a meaningful equity gap over renting, just a smaller one than the roughly $180,000 in our specific example. Here's the psychological mechanism underneath all of this, and it's the same one that shows up in every version of this story, whether it's a retirement account, a home purchase, or any other early financial decision. Neither Jordan nor Alex could see in year 1 that the decision in front of them mattered nearly as much as it did. A 10% retirement contribution felt like a minor administrative task, not a 15-year, 6-figure decision. Buying a modest condo instead of renting felt like a lifestyle preference, not a wealth-building event. The reason these decisions get underweighted in the moment is that their consequences are almost entirely invisible in year 1. The gap between Jordan and Alex in year 1 was functionally zero. It only became visible around year 5 or 6, and by then, it had already become extremely difficult to close because the head start had already started compounding on itself. This is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. If you had shown Jordan in year 1 a spreadsheet proving that his decision to wait would cost him $400,000 over 15 years, he almost certainly would have made a different choice. The problem was never that Jordan didn't care about his financial future. The problem was that the true cost of waiting was mathematically invisible at the moment the decision was actually being made, and by the time it became visible, years of compounding had already been permanently lost. There's a specific reason this invisibility trap is so effective, and it's worth naming directly. Human beings are generally decent at evaluating decisions when the consequences show up quickly. If skipping a workout made you visibly weaker the next day, almost everyone would work out consistently. But financial decisions like this one operate on a completely different timescale, where the consequence of skipping shows up years later, disconnected enough from the original decision that your brain never builds a strong association between the two. Jordan didn't experience any negative feedback in year 1, year 2, or even year 4 for not contributing to his retirement account. The absence of visible consequences got quietly interpreted as evidence that the decision didn't matter much. And in reality, the consequence was simply delayed, not absent. And delayed consequences are one of the hardest categories of risk for anyone to intuitively weigh correctly. This also explains why financial advice like start investing early rarely lands the way it's intended to. It's not that people disagree with the advice. It's that the advice describes a benefit that's mathematically enormous, but experientially invisible for years, competing against present moment concerns, paying off debt, building a cash cushion, feeling financially ready, that are experientially immediate and therefore feel more urgent, even when they're objectively less consequential to the 15-year outcome. It's worth pointing out
that this isn't really a story about Jordan lacking information. Jordan almost certainly knew, at least in theory, that investing early was a smart move. Most what he lacked wasn't the knowledge. It was a mechanism that made the abstract knowledge feel urgent enough to act on immediately rather than defer. This is exactly why automation matters so much more than advice in stories like this one. Advice relies on someone redeciding to act correctly every single day until the decision finally gets made. Automation removes the need to redecide at all, which is precisely the gap between what Alex did in month 4 and what Jordan kept meaning to do for 5 years.